Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hello and welcome to the Family Ministry Podcast. I'm Nick, I'm your host, and this podcast is for family ministry leaders. If you serve in children's ministry, youth, student ministry, or maybe you're a next-gen pastor, this podcast is for you. We interview a guest every week, try to learn from them what they're doing in their ministry. Maybe it's in one of those ministries, or maybe sometimes we have guests who what they do impacts all of those ministries. Well, in this episode 70, I talk with Cindy Fiala, and Cindy and I talk about two things, really. We talk about hard conversations, how to have those tough, hard conversations that always come up in ministry, how to navigate conflict and do it well. And then we also shift gears to a totally different topic, and we talk about tribes for parents. All of us want to help partner with parents more, equip parents, and few things will help parents more than getting them connected with other parents. And so Cindy talks about her desire for that, and she shares something that she's done before at her church that I think we could all do, which is really, really helpful. So before I jump into the interview, I want to remind you that if you're listening live, like the week this comes out, that Friday is the deadline to sign up for mastermind groups. And that right now they're over 80% full. So there's not many spots left anyway. But Friday will be the deadline for that. We'll close the entry for applications there and kind of get those groups launched for this fall into next year, which I'm really excited about. There's also the Volunteer Playbook group, a pilot group, 10 weeks. It meets every week. This fall, we'll have video calls where I'll teach content. But essentially, we'll work on recruiting more volunteers for your ministry by kind of rebuilding your system from the ground up. We'll figure out what is negatively impacting volunteers. Where do you need to strengthen things? How can you build your system and your foundation so that all of it works towards recruiting more volunteers for your ministry? There are a few spots left for that group as well. That, too, ends on Friday. So if you're interested in the mastermind groups or the volunteer playbook group, be sure to sign up this week right away. But let's go ahead now and jump into my conversation with Cindy Fiala about tribes for parents and how to have hard conversations. Well, it's great to have Cindy Fiala back on the podcast. Welcome, Cindy.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Hey, it's great. Life is good.
So it's been over a year, a little bit, since you were first on the podcast, episode 6, very, very early in the podcast, and a lot has changed. So it'd be great maybe if you could just kind of catch everybody up on what's going on with you and what changes have happened over the last year.
Great. Yeah, it's been a whirlwind of a year for us. We found out last June of 2016 that God was apparently calling us to Colorado, which was a surprise to us. And so we spent a couple of months praying about it and felt like that's where God was calling us. So we now are in northern Colorado, and I'm telling you, Nick, it is beautiful here and we love living in Colorado. Once we made the decision, we started praying about what God would do with me next. The move was really for my husband's company and his job. And so we were contacted by a church in Longmont, Colorado, by the name of LifeBridge Church. And so I came on staff at LifeBridge in January of this year as a family pastor and really leading this church through a new phase and bringing family ministry as a collaborative effort to the church and to the community. So it's been really fun. There's lots of really good work to do here, and we're having a lot of fun doing it.
That's great. Your pictures definitely look amazing, when you share pictures of the scene there, which is pretty much true of anybody I know that lives in Colorado. So that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say it's pretty fun. We walk out of the front of the church and the Rocky Mountains are literally right there. We're just 26 miles from the National Forest up there. Yeah. And it's the scenery is incredible.
That's awesome. We said we'd talk about some two good topics today, really having hard conversations, kind of conflict, and tribes for parents. But I'm going to throw you a curve right from the beginning, because I wanted to just ask how hard has it been? Because, you were at Preston Trail Church for a number of years and you had to leave, and obviously just different circumstances. How hard was that to leave, that church and that role and that team, even as good as it has been, obviously, to come on with a new team?
Yeah. C.S. Lewis says in his book, A Grief Observed, with great love comes great grief. And I would not be truthful if I didn't say there was a certain amount of grief in leaving Texas and the relationships that we built there and the ministry God allowed us to be a part of. And so that's hard, but it's also good because, boy, without those relationships and without the things that God did there, there wouldn't be grief. And so I think God taught me a lot about how precious grief really is, which is weird. But it's been good to know that there are just rich relationships there, and that God allowed us to be a part of something so dynamic and thriving in that community. And so coming here, there was, for me personally, I had to work through that. And I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say that I probably fought the transition a little bit unconsciously for the first couple of months, not knowing that I was really grieving like I was and not allowing the grief to embrace me, which sounds kind of funny, but it's been a good process. I've learned a lot personally. And it's helped me then to be able to go, gosh, thank you, Lord, for that time. And now let's go here. But so it was a little challenging moving, more than I thought it was going to be, because I think in the past, I've not allowed myself to grieve. And so just working through a lot of things like in Brene Brown's books and her work, I've just been able to wrestle with some things and really go, wow, this isn't bad. It's good. And thank you, Lord, for allowing me to have these relationships and this time, this season that I did have grief associated with it when we left. So in a weird way, grief is a gift. And it's been a good journey to learn that at a different level. Yeah.
Well, and without really feeling the grief, right, it's hard to move on and start new and be and I ask that because so many people listening have transitioned recently or will in the future, and I just think it's helpful. So thanks for sharing that. I know it's been tough, but that just is a tribute to how great the relationships were at Preston Trail, and and the new relationships you're forming here will be great as well. But it's definitely not easy. So I appreciate you sharing. It's similar in some ways to what we're going to talk about with hard conversations, because there's parts of hard conversations or conflict in ministry that you just don't want to do it. You just don't want to move. You don't want to move. You don't want to have that conversation. You don't want to deal with that situation. But in kind of a same way, if you do it in a healthy way, it's good. You do get to a better place. So what have you learned about hard conversations and conflict in ministry over the years that we could all learn from?
Well, I think that one of the things, as I was considering these questions we were going to talk about today, one of the things that I thought about was that if you're in leadership, and really, if we're just human, we're going to have conflict and we're going to have hard conversations. And what I've learned over the years is I have to look back kind of behind the curtain. And I need to look at myself and go, okay, what's my motivation for this hard conversation? And how am I going to approach it? And so some of the things that I think we need as leaders, especially in ministry, because ministry is just hard. And we used to say, and we still do say, that ministry is messy because we're dealing with people at just raw levels. And everybody is passionate about where they're at and what they're doing. And yet, as leaders, it's our job to help people grow and to equip them and to help them be the very best version of themselves, whether they're part of our staff, part of our ministry, paid or unpaid staff, or their families that were coming alongside. So one of the things that I thought about first off was we shouldn't be surprised by hard conversations or conflict. We should actually be prepared to come up against these and to have these conversations. We need to expect them, and then we also need to know how to approach them. So one of the ways that I approach hard conversations is I got some really great mentorship years ago that taught me that we should approach these conversations the way Jesus approached conversations as Christian leaders. And he always approached conflict and hard conversations with love, from a motivation of love. So for me, there's like 4 bullet points. I need to check my motives. What's my motive for this hard conversation? Is it because I'm angry? And this goes into parenting too, right? And even into our marriages, our marriage relationships. Am I angry? Do I just want to get my way? Or what am I feeling? Am I feeling irritated? Whatever those feelings are. And then I have to check myself, because if it's about me, then I probably don't have the right motivation. The next thing is I need to align my heart to truth, not emotions. Emotions will put me in the wrong direction every single time. And so, what's the truth about this situation? Is there something that I can learn from this? Or, am I only going then in this to get my agenda heard and move my agenda forward? One of the things that we talk about, my husband and I do a lot of marriage ministry, and when we're talking to couples or we're talking to groups, we talk about communication and even conflict. We call it intense fellowship when it comes to our marriage,
it sound a lot better. Yeah.
Right? When it comes to our marriage, but really we can apply this to any conversation. Communication is simply mutual understanding. So how can we, in hard conversations or in times of conflict, our main goal should always be mutual understanding, not just understand my side and not just for them for me to understand their side, but this idea of mutual understanding. So what's the heart of the truth, and how can we get to that truth? Kind of setting our emotions to the side. So that's the second bullet point. The third thing that I kind of always try to approach when it comes to hard conversation is not to make decisions or have these conversations when I'm tired, when I'm hungry, or when I'm just so busy that I'm not being thoughtful about my words or the direction of that conversation. I need to take time to pray through it. I need to take time to check my motivations. Jesus had lots of hard conversations, but his motive was always, always, always powered by and pushed by love. He always had the best interest of the other people in mind. And so if we go into hard conversations, whether it's with one of our congregants, or it's a parent, or it's someone on our staff, or it's a volunteer, when our motivation is love and our motivation is for the best for that person and the best for maybe the ministry at a higher level, then it changes the way that we approach it. You know what I mean? And so I have to be prepared, and I have to be in the best state of mind that I'm in. I have to bring the best version of me into that conversation. And then the last thing I would say would be lead by self-differentiation. So I have a friend and a mentor that has mentored me through this, even just recently. Leading by self-differentiation is threefold. So we continually cast vision, and we know that we cast vision by casting the why, not the how or the what. So when we're having hard conversations, we need to be casting vision about why we do what we do, why we go forward the way we're going forward, or what's the end in mind that we're trying to lead that person to, or that ministry to. The second part is probably the hardest, because this is where the conflict comes in. Keep people close to us, especially those that are unhappy. So our tendency is that we kind of avoid, or we keep people at a distance that are unhappy. But the reality is, if we can get in front of them and we can cast vision, and that sounds so kind of corporate. And so bring it down to a personal level, bring it down and make it about people, and make it about, because that's the business we're in. We're in the people business, and we're in the heart business. And so if we can approach people, even the people that are unhappy, from a perspective of, I want to get to know you. And this is more than just an agenda. This is more than just about something I'm trying to push forward, or the problem that they're bringing to me. But let's get to the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is that we're both people. And then the last part of leading by self-differentiation is always, always, always be the non-anxious presence. And the way that I break that down to my team and to the people around me is I have this rule. And whenever I say this, people kind of laugh at first. And then I go, nope, I'm really serious. So the rule is, it's a no freak out rule. So, right, as leaders, we need to be leading through this non-anxious presence. We are always the calm presence in the room or in a conversation. And so if someone else's hula hoop is rattling because they're discontent, or something isn't going their way, or someone moved their cheese, we can't allow their hula hoop to get our hula hoop rattling, if that makes sense. So when we approach these hard conversations, again, check your motives. What's your motive? Number 2, align your heart to truth, and don't enter those conversations through emotions and what you're feeling, but through truth. Don't make decisions or have conversations when you're busy. And I do have a great example, and this wasn't even really a hard conversation, but it was a conversation that I had when I was really busy, and I made I learned from my mistake. So I got here to Colorado, and we're going in a different direction. We're going from basically individual ministries, and we've combined, we're in one aligned family ministry now. And so part of that new strategy was, we decided that, and we were all aligned on this, we decided that we were not going to have VBS, at least this year, so that we could begin moving in a more aligned family ministry way, so that we could partner with parents. In our culture, it was more of a kind of a drop-off scenario, and we weren't allowed to it didn't allow us the opportunity to partner with parents. And so we were getting lots of conversations. This was early spring, lots of parents calling in, hey, when's VBS? And one of my staff members came to me, and I had like a bazillion plates I was, balancing, and said, hey, what do we want to do? Do we want to send an email? And I didn't think through the unintended unintended consequences of sending an email. In the past, when I've led through these kind of changes, we did it a little more passively, and we answered the questions as they came in, and maybe we put something on our website. So this time I said, sure, go ahead and draft something. I'll edit it as needed, and we'll just send it out to all our parents. Well, I mean, that just created a hailstorm of ash and sackcloth. And
that's right.
Yeah. And so we internally call it VBS Gate. And nice. So that created a lot of really hard conversations, because it was what we'd always done here. And it wasn't the wrong move, but my one decision, because I made a decision when I was busy, created a lot of hard conversations. And so, I mean, I took total blame, but here's the positive side of it. It allowed me to get in front of people that I wouldn't have had a chance or an opportunity to get in front of, and really cast a vision about what we were doing and why we made that decision. And so, to take a bad decision, that was made in a hurried, busy fashion, to make it positive, I had to check my motives. I couldn't go into those conversations emotionally. It allowed me then, I made it positive, and it allowed me to get in front of a lot of people to cast the vision. And every time I was able to do that, people were like, "Oh, that makes sense. That's awesome. We're excited about that." Now, are there still people that are mourning the loss of something that in its season was really great? Yes. However, we are moving forward, and it did allow us to have some great conversations, and we're still having great conversations about it. So learn from me. Don't make decisions in a hurry or rashly without thinking through the unintended consequences. So,
yeah. Well, and you were probably going to have hard conversations either way. You just got them all kind of at once, probably, after the email, as opposed to maybe, as they came. Now, and you've done this for a long time, so, you're used to this, but I know a lot of people listening, most people, vast majority of people hate conflict or hard conversations. All of it just feels bad, right? Like there's nothing good about this. So what do you do if, like, your personality is, I hate this. Like, even when I know it's good, I hate it. Like, I don't want to do it. How do you help someone? Because you probably have people like that on your team now, or did before. How do you help people have those difficult conversations that are necessary when it's just not their natural bent?
Yeah. As I was reading that question, I'm like preparing for our conversation today. I'm like, I don't think any of us are wired for conflict. None of us. The
people that aren't. It's not good. They are for bad reasons, right? So they got to learn some other ways to have healthy conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I think there's a couple of different. I have led many staff members through the process of how we have these hard conversations, and it's interesting because some of us. We're afraid to have that conflict. We're afraid to head into that conflict because we're afraid of being, maybe we're afraid of people not liking us. We're afraid that it will hurt our credibility. We're afraid that whatever it is that we're afraid of, it becomes more about us than it does about the other person, typically. We're afraid of being rejected. We could even take these ideas and these feelings into sharing the gospel with people. Sometimes we don't share the gospel with people because we're afraid it's going to be a conflict. And it's because we're afraid we're going to be rejected. And really, it's nothing to do with us. It's everything to do when it comes to having conversations, spiritual conversations. It's about them rejecting Jesus and truth. And so when it comes to just regular conflict, again, I lead my staff members through these 4 steps that I outlined earlier. Hey, what's your motivation? If you know you're leading this person either to be their best version of themselves, or like, for instance, many times in ministry, the conflict that we get into is, and this is what we've navigated a lot in this new culture that I'm in now, because we're shifting the way we do ministry. We went from basically a Sunday school model to leading small. So we're leading small groups now in every environment from 2 years old all the way up through high school. And a lot of our people team members, our volunteers that have been on our team have been there. They're generational. And so they've been there for multiple eras. And, initially having these conversations were really hard because, they felt like what they were doing was good, and it was good. It wasn't that it was bad. But they took that as a personal affront or attack on their own personal, what they felt, what they were bringing to the table. And again, we at our core, we're very self-centered, and it's not good, bad, or indifferent. It's just who we are. We attended the Willow Creek Global Summit last week, and one of the speakers said, talking about evaluations, I think it was Sheryl Sandberg, she's from Facebook. She said, evaluations are objective because our evaluation isn't based on the other person. It's based on how we see the other person. So our evaluation of other people is based on us. It's not based on the other person. That was a huge eye opener to me. And so when we go into these conversations, especially with volunteers, we have to check our motivation. To go back to our example here, I had to lead my team, my pastors and my directors through this exercise of, you are leading them to their next step. If they're not able, or they don't see themselves leading small, that's okay. What is it that God's leading them to? And what is it that God has for them in this season? So again, it's not that we're telling them that they are not valued, or that what they bring to the table is good, bad, or indifferent, but this is the direction we're going. This is the way we've prayed. This is what we feel like is the best for this next generation. Maybe what we've done in the past was good for that generation, but maybe it won't get us from here to there. And so helping people understand that there's really not a conflict. What you're feeling is natural. We want to affirm who you are, but we also want to get you on the right seat of the bus. And so helping them understand. So check your motives. Make sure that you're speaking out of truth and not your own emotions. And then help them know that we're going in this direction. Remember, cast the vision. Keep people even the people that are unhappy close to you. And then be the non-anxious presence. And so as I'm looking at my notes about this question, again, it comes back. The key is motivation. What's your motivation to this difficult conversation? And make sure that we did just go through a pretty interesting transition where we're starting a new service, and we moved some really significant ministries off of Wednesday night to a Thursday night. And it's to begin aligning for some, a really cool opportunity in January. And, these were really tough conversations because the ministries that we moved from Wednesday and we're asking them to move to Thursday, they've been there for 10 years or more. And there's a lot of ownership for these ministries. And so we had to go into those. It felt super uncomfortable. And I'm the kind of leader that I want to go in, I want to cast vision, and we're all going to be great. It's going to be unicorns and everything's going to be awesome. And that's not how it was. We're a very established church. 126 years old this year. So that comes with really great legacy. But everybody listening, because you're all leaders, know what else that brings with it. It brings a lot of resistance because this is the way we've always done things, or we've never done things this way. Some of the comments that we heard were, why are we moving off of Wednesday night? That's traditionally church night. And inside me, I'm screaming, exactly. That's exactly why we're moving it off of Wednesday night, because that doesn't align with what happens in the community anymore. And if we're going to reach the one that's not here, then we have to contextualize to our community and to what is happening out in our community. We cannot be so micro-focused on what we do as a church, because the church isn't for us as believers. And that sounds like I'm speaking out of a voice of heretic, but
I think people understand that, though.
Yeah.
The people listening, I think, understand that.
We have to create some tension so that we keep our congregations alive and we keep them thinking about the one. And in our culture, and Nick, I think your culture might be similar. When I got here, I discovered that we only have families coming 0.8 times a month.
That's crazy.
Because
everybody talks about less attendance, and usually what they mean is about 2 times a month. So less than 1 is even crazier.
That's significant. And so we're trying to push hard to re-engage those families that are only coming less than once a month and engage for the first time people that have never come. And so to have those conversations with people that have been in the church for a long time, I mean, that was some conflict. And there was lots of emotion around it. And so those of us that were leading these conversations, we had to remain non-anxious and non-emotional around it to the point, but listen, right? We have to validate, and we have to make sure that we're saying what we're doing is good, and what you've done in the past is good. And we're saying yes. And it's the power of the and, not but the power of the and. And so how can we as leaders do that? Well, I think it's by checking our motives. It's by making sure we're speaking from truth, not emotion, that we're not doing it when we're tired, hungry, or busy, and by continually casting vision and validating the people that we're having these conversations with.
That's great. And we could keep talking about this, right? There's so many different variables in play and specific situations that people need to lead through, but I can't let you get away without telling us some of the great things you've done before to help connect parents in community or in tribes together, which is like a whole different conversation. So we're shifting gears here, but I think all of us want to do a better job partnering with parents. You know, if you ask a lot of leaders today, that'd be one of the top 2 or 3 things that are their priorities. They want to help parents lead their kids better. And I think a lot of us also know that one of the best ways we can do that is to connect them to each other. Mm-hmm. And so, but I don't know that a lot of churches are doing that well. Like some churches, if they just have a really good small group culture and system, they're connecting parents up with each other because of that, right? They're just trying to connect them based on affinity. And so that kind of works. But then there are a lot of churches where maybe that's not really happening. It's happening a little bit, but you know, most parents aren't connected to other parents with kids their age. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about what you've done I know you've only been at your church now for a short time, but maybe going back to Preston Trail, what are some things that you did to help connect parents in tribes together, and what came of that? What was the benefit of that?
Yeah. So we, I first of all, I would just say that yes, everybody in ministry would agree that we need to help equip parents to be the primary spiritual influencer over their kids. But I want to validate too that, I think this is the hardest part of our strategy. I really do. And I think because, just over generations, when moms went into the workplace, when moms had to go into the workplace during World War II. I mean, it goes back so far over multiple generations to the point where we are now, where we send our kids to school for intellect, and we send our kids to church so the church can train them up spiritually. And so it's not just helping equip parents, it's almost helping to change their mindset, and from kind of a fixed mindset of, no, that's your job, the church, to a growth mindset of, oh no, this has been the commandment that God's given me way back in Deuteronomy 6 to be the spiritual influencer over my family and my kids. How am I doing that? And then us as a church giving it back, because I think over generations, we as a church, the Big C church, we've just taken that and we've become the authority for children and students in their spiritual development, and not given that. We've kind of robbed that of parents. And so, I think this is one of the hardest parts of our strategy. And so, one of the things that we've done, we kind of sat down and we asked the question, number one, what's the biggest challenge for parents? And we all know that parents are just busy now. And not only are parents busy, but kids are busy. And then we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as parents, and in our communities, to make sure that our kids are getting the best opportunities. And so that ends up looking like families that are chasing after, the best preschools, starting really early, the best preschools, and the best. How can I set my kids up? And I'm not saying any of this is bad, but when you add it all together, you've got a challenge for parents that they don't even know what they don't know. So as ministries, I think that it's important for us to kind of hit a timeout for parents and families and go, hey, let's just talk about what this means. And so one of the things that we did is we identified in our community what the biggest challenges were for families. And then we actually created a strategy for parents. What were the things that we wanted parents, if parents were always turning these dials, we felt like they would be always taking a next right step to influence their kids. And so, without sharing what ours were, I would encourage ministries to go, what would be our strategy for parents? There are some really great content through the Rethink group, through Orange. One of the books that I love is Parenting Beyond Your Capacity. There are some really great fundamental things in that book that you could lead parents through and ask them to continually turn those dials. Like, are you parenting with the end in mind? Are you making it personal in your own life? How are you growing yourself so that you can lead your children? So anyway, that was some foundational things that we started with. And then once we created our strategy for parents, then we thought, okay, how do we get them? How do we create tribes? And we just love this idea of creating tribes for parents. And so, but again, parents are busy. And so, not setting our expectations so high that parents couldn't achieve it, and that we didn't feel like we were hitting our marks, that parents could walk through this strategy. What we decided was to create, we did a big back to school family weekend, and that was an all play family weekend where we family ministry took over services. And in fact, they just had a big one last weekend. So you could go onto their website at prestontrail.org and see what they did. It's so fun to see how they took our original idea and they've just exploded it. This is the third one that they've done there now. We're actually planning our very first one here in September. The rhythm here in Colorado is different because we live close to the Rocky Mountains. People don't re-engage here until September or even October. And so we're doing a big family weekend here, all play weekend during all of our services in September. And so you could watch for that at LifeBridge Christian Church. That's lbcc.org, coming up in September. But then it's not just doing that. So that's kind of your big end of the funnel where you can engage people initially. But for us, the question we wanted to answer was, what's the next step? What's a win for a family or parents from that event? And so for us, it was a next step of what we called was parent camp. And so we created a 10-week opportunity for parents to come regardless of what phase their kids were in. And we took Parenting Beyond Your Capacity material and some of the phase timeline material that Kristen Ivy has created through the phase project. And you can find that at, I think it's it's justaphase.org, or justaphase.org. And we just answered we addressed some fundamental topics, but really the goal was to create tribes of parents. So parents signed up, they registered for parent camp based on the phase of child that they were parenting right then. If they had multiple kids, they would ask us, what tribe should I sign up for? And we suggested the phase that they were having the most difficult or the most challenge in. So when they came into the group, they were sitting with parents that were in similar phases of parenting. We had new parent tribe. We had preschool tribe. We had early elementary tribe. We had upper elementary tribe. We had a middle school tribe, a high school tribe. We even had single parent and blended family tribes. And for 10 weeks, we covered through a large group at a very high level, these different concepts. And then we broke them out into these tribes to talk about how this applies to the phase of parenting that they're in. And the content was great, but it was the opportunity for parents to be in a tribe. Well, you know what happens when you're with people for 10 weeks. You create
connections. Yeah.
Yes, you create relationships. And so the stories that came out of that during the last week were just phenomenal. One woman, she stood up and she said, "I'm a single mom. I came into this." And she ironically didn't sign up for a single parent tribe. She signed up for the tribe for the phase that her child was in, which I believe was lower elementary. She said, "I came into this not knowing anybody with the challenge. It's hard being a single mom. I don't have friends. I don't really even have time for friends because I'm doing this thing by myself. But I came into this, and the biggest thing I'm coming out of is, number one, I can do this. Number two, I have people that I call friends and family now, and we're doing this thing together." Nick, that was a huge win. The other huge story that came out of that was a guy that stood up out of our new parent tribe, and he said, "I didn't even sign up for this. I'm dating a woman who has a young child, and we're like getting serious. And I thought, she signed up for it." And he asked, "Can I come along? Because if we're going to continue going the direction I think we're going, I need to figure out this parenting thing." Here's what he said. He said, it was like taking a 301 parenting class. I feel like I'm not fully equipped, but man, I have some really good tools in my tool belt to be a parent when that time comes. But he said, even more than that, I've learned what it means to have a relationship with Jesus because of the relationships that I built. I mean, those are things that don't happen just by coming on Sundays, by even, coming to a Sunday school class or whatever it is. We've got to connect. We've got to figure out how to connect people in tribes. So for us, it started with this idea of parent camp. So they're doing it a couple times a year now. It's our goal to start it here. I think it's a great model. We've seen great success from it. Our next step here at LifeBridge for families is we're doing a 5-week family and marriage series on the weekends. So we're starting a little higher level, but we're ending it with a marriage conference the very last week of our family and marriage series. And so it'll be a way for people to come in, be connected in tribes, and then hopefully move forward. And so for us, it's a little slower. At Preston Trail, we'd had 5 years to build up to parent camp. So I would say to people listening out there, if you have small group ministry for adults in your church, connect and integrate with that adult ministry, and ask, hey, can we include questions for parents on how they interpret the material they're learning in small groups to have conversations with their kids? Can we include Parenting Beyond Your Capacity or a similar book on parenting within these small groups? Can we begin to form some tribes of parents in similar phases of parenting that create relationships? Because at the end of the day, parenting is hard. Parents don't know what they need to know because they just don't know what they don't know. And we have the opportunity and the material to help people connect and to begin to learn and forge these relationships so that they feel validated, so they feel like they can do it, and so that we're encouraging them to create a better future for their kids.
That's great. That's awesome. I love that you're doing it there now at LifeBridge as well. After having done that at Preston Trail, we're doing the same thing, as you know, because I stole all your ideas a couple weeks ago when we talked about your parent kickoff event at Preston Trail. I got to share them with our team the other day last week when we were planning the event, and so I was like, well, let me just, I had 30 ideas or whatever that you'd given me, so we put them in the right categories and everything. So we're excited. We can't wait to do that too, and we're thinking a lot about what is that next step. And the next step is community, but what is it exactly going to look like coming out of that event? So that's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. How can people connect with you? They might have more questions about this or parent camp or something like that. How can they connect with you?
They can connect with me on Facebook. I'm there, Cindy Fiala. I'm on Twitter, Cindy Fiala. I'm on Instagram. You can find me under all those names. And then also they can reach out to me via email. That's C Fiala, C F as in Frank, IALA @lbcc.org. And I'm happy to talk with anybody. I love talking about leadership and how we can help families be everything that God created them to be. So I get pretty passionate about it. So I'd love to talk to people.
That's great. Well, Cindy, thanks again for coming on the podcast. Love it. Love having you back a second time. You always bring a lot of great value and content. And I love what you're doing to kind of blaze a trail to serve parents better. And now you're unifying a ministry again, like starting from scratch, which is just awesome. It's going to be so great for LifeBridge. So I'm thrilled you're there, and the scenery's beautiful. So things are good. Thanks for coming on the podcast, though. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I love listening to the podcast. I love what you're doing too. And I think, man, just thank you for all the great content that you're giving us. I learn something every time I listen. So keep up the great work, Nick.
Thanks. Me too. I do as well. In some ways, it could be totally selfish if I wanted. Just I get to learn every week, the conversations.
Right.
Just like I did with you, steal all your ideas. So it's great. Well, thanks, Cindy.
Thank you, Nick. Bye.
Cindy's such a great leader, isn't she? I loved how she rolled with the punches there when I kind of dropped that question on her right in the beginning about that transition. But I know that was big and it's tough, and many of you are in transition, so I hope that was helpful if you're in that spot. But Cindy just has so much wisdom to share, and this was no different. She's led a number of great initiatives in terms of partnering with parents, and I wish we could have had more time to talk about that because she has a lot to share there. But hopefully that little bit that she shared at the end was helpful to you. And here are a couple action items I think you could take coming out of this podcast. One is if you have a hard conversation that you need to have, take her steps that she talked about and use them to prepare for it. You can go to the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 70 and kind of get the outline of what she talked about there. But I'd encourage you to use that and have the conversation. Definitely stop avoiding it if that's what's going on right now. Now, if you want to take the action step of creating tribes for parents, I think all you have to do is take that idea that she had. You don't have to do that exactly the same way. But how can you create tribes for parents in the next 2 months? Right? It doesn't have to be for everybody in the church. I mean, you could really pilot this thing with one group for parents. Look for 10 parents, maybe it's 5 couples, whatever it is. Try to obviously group them around having kids at the same stage of life in the same phase and test it out and see what works. I think that could be really, really helpful and probably grow into something big down the road. Before we wrap up, just want to remind you again to sign up for mastermind groups and the volunteer playbook group if you're interested. Registration closes Friday, if you're listening to this when it comes out. In the next episode, I interview JC Thompson, and JC and I talk about his journey where he's basically had 3 promotions, I think, at his church, from leading a specific ministry and really the large group portion of of kids ministry and elementary to now being kind of the next gen pastor. And we also talk about how his church structures the age groups. So a lot of you like to have different structures for age groups. Maybe you have a separate 4th, 5th grade ministry or a 5th, 6th or something like that. And they have that at his church. And so we kind of talk about what are their structures, what are the age groups, what are the benefits, what are the negatives, of having a structure that way. So it's a great interview. JC shares a lot, and I just love getting a peek into like how their church is structured and his journey over the last decade at the same church, but having multiple roles. It's really, really helpful. I think you'll love it. So be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode like that one when it comes out. And until then, I hope you have a great week. See you.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.